open the pod bay doors.
Greetings and welcome to another exciting episode of the Cinematic Traveler Podcast. I am your intrepid movie-exploring host, Chris, and on this episode, I am going to be bringing you my review for the latest Lycan adventure to hit the screens, and that would be Wolfman, directed by Leigh Whannell, a horror movie in January. What could get us more excited? But this is a werewolf movie, and I do love a good werewolf movie. In fact, I actually saw a werewolf. He was drinking a pina colada at Trader Vic's, and his hair was perfect. But I am super excited to be talking about this movie. But before I do, let me ask a favor. Whatever you're listening to the show on, if you could please just hit that follow button, I would greatly appreciate it. It does help me and the show, but it also helps you because you won't miss any future episodes. And you can also go back and listen to previous episodes of my amazing reviews in my sexy, sexy voice. Also, if you could spread the word and share the show with your friends or on social media, that would be great. You can also follow me on social media. I am on Instagram at Cinematic Traveler Pod. I do have a Twitter or X account. That one is at CMT Pod. I have a Blue Sky one. That one is at Cinematic Traveler Pod something. And I have an email address, thecinematictravelerpod@gmail.com. So you have plenty of ways to follow the show and get in touch with me. So there, I got through that quick, fast, and in a hurry so we could dive into this episode. But before I do, as I like to do on every episode, let me ask you, how are you doing, my beloved listener? Hopefully you're doing a little better than I am. I just got out of the movie tonight and got home, and the moon is out, and something just doesn't feel right. I don't know. Is he setting something up with that? Anyway, but hopefully you're doing well as we are a few weeks into 2025 and it's already roller coaster ride. So let's strap in because it's going to be a wild year. But hopefully we can survive this together and maybe I can provide a little diversion from whatever curveballs life is going to throw at us this year. All right, so enough of the witty banter. Let's go ahead and get into this review. Before I do, let me over-explain what is going to happen on this show. I am going to give you a spoiler-free review and also a spoiler-free plot synopsis. Now, in that plot synopsis, I have hidden two movie quotes from other movies that are somewhat related to this film. If you can identify those and get in touch with me on whatever means I have given you earlier in the show, you get a point for each one that you get right. Whoever has the most points at the end of the month gets to pick a movie for me to review next month. Now, you can always go back and listen to previous episodes and catch up. Or if you want to, you just listen every now and then. You can play along and just have some fun with it. It's okay. I know it sounds a little uncool, but it's okay to be uncool with Chris. That's the best time of the week, is to be uncool with Chris. So now with The Wolfman, directed by Leigh Whannell. Sorry, I just feel something's not right. I don't know. Hold on. Oh, baby, it's me, the Wolfman, and I'm here to talk about this movie with you now. And I can't wait. I do love a good movie about the Wolfman. Now, we open this movie with a young boy and his dad, and they out in the wilderness of Oregon. I love Oregon, out there on the West Coast. And then all of a sudden, they're attacked by some mysterious creature. It must be a Wolfman. I don't know. The dad seems to be looking for him. And they find him, and they are none too happy about it. Baby, then we jump ahead about 30 years in this movie, and we meet the grown-up boy. His name is Blake, played by Christopher Abbott, and he lives in the safety of the city with his wife, Charlotte, played by Julie Garner, and their daughter, Ginger, played by Matilda Firth. Well, let me tell you, Blake gets a letter about his dad being declared dead, and that Blake has to come empty out their family home in Oregon out in the woods. So Blake decides to pack his family up and leave the safety of his city and head out to the woods where they had that dangerous encounter. Doesn't sound like a good plan to the Wolfman. Now, on their way to the house, they get in a bit of an accident when Blake is scratched by a werewolf. Their wolf. Hint, hint. Now they run away and they make it to Blake's dad's house. But Blake starts transforming into a lichen. A lichen? Well, is that a strange word for a wolf man? Why don't you just call it a wolf man to stop being pretentious? Charlotte and Ginger, inside that house, trying to survive their loving family member being turned into this monster. And maybe they can get him out to the hospital and get him some help, because they don't know what he's turning into until it's too late. Now, can they save themselves as well as Blake, or are they doomed because the Wolfman's got nards, hint, hint, and can't be stopped? Well, I'm not going to spoil that for you, baby, but I am going to give you the best review for Wolfman in all the podcast, all the universe, baby, all the universe. But I'm afraid the Wolfman has to leave right now because Chris's vocal cords are about to explode for a joke that only about 3 of you are going to guess. And that's all from the Wolfman, baby. Oh, well, I'm sorry about that. I don't know. It must be something in the moonlight that took me over. Oh, but hopefully you're still listening. I shouldn't scare you off with my with my Wolfman impersonation. The Wolfman Jack. Do y'all know who the Wolfman Jack is? Probably not. All right. So moving into my review, if you are new here, you haven't listened in a while, I do break my reviews down into 3 segments: the good, the bad, and the nitpicky. The good is the stuff that works for me in the movie. The bad, obviously, stuff that doesn't. And the nitpicky, these are things that are neither good nor bad, just silly things I see in these movies, sometimes Hollywoodisms or just sometimes goofy things that make my weird little brain laugh. And as I'm trying to do, at the risk of not being able to speak for a week, I'd like to make you laugh on this podcast, because there's one thing I like to do on this planet, that is to make people laugh. So let us go into the good or the positive of the movie. I will say Lee Whannell has continued to impress me as a director. Of course, he directed the retelling of The Invisible Man a few years back. That was a bit of a hit. He has also worked on, I think he directed Insidious 3. He did another movie that was pretty good. I think it's Upgrade, a little action movie. If you've never seen that one, that's a pretty fun movie. I mean, he's worked with James Wan on the Saw series and the Insidious series. So not only is he well-versed in horror, but he has been around long enough that he has sort of developed a style that I kind of dig. It helps with this movie. The visuals are really good. He sure does know how to use a camera very well. There's a couple scenes that I really enjoyed. There's the car wreck scene that you've seen in the trailer where they're kind of hanging in the tree. There's got some cool optics to it as he moves the camera around I think it's a moving truck. They kind of move around as they're climbing on top of it, trying to, like in Jurassic Park where it falls, they're trying to avoid that. But it's pretty cool how he moves the camera around. It gives you different angles. He does the same thing in the house as they're moving around in this creepy old house. Also, there's a scene where, well, let me just say it involves a greenhouse and they're on top of it being chased. And I don't give away any more than that, but it's kind of a cool little shot from above them that I liked a lot and kind of heightened the tension a little bit. There's also a really interesting thing that he does in this movie that I think is probably the highlight visually for me. And again, I don't think this is spoiling anything because it's kind of in the trailers, but you sort of have this way that he moves the camera where it transfers the point of view, where at one moment you're Charlotte, who's trying to help Blake out because she can't figure out what's going on with him. She's just trying to keep him. They just think he's got some disease or something. So she's trying to, again, obviously take care of him. But as he gets further into werewolf, he can't really understand what she's saying. So it'll kind of move from her point of view and you can understand what she's saying. And then when it kind of rotates around to him and just the way she looks and her eyes kind of glow and he starts to see like their vein and the blood and he can hear them really well. And then it's kind of cool because she starts talking really garbled, he can't understand what she's saying. So it's kind of a neat way to show different versions of a scene as well as give you an understanding of what he's going through as he's transforming into the werewolf, which is a different take we haven't seen on the werewolf mythology before. And it was about the most original thing that I enjoyed in this film. Also, the sound design for this movie really adds a lot. I mentioned that his hearing starts to get a little more werewolfian, as it were, so you can pick up different sounds. There's a scene that's really cool. I don't want to give it away, but it kind of plays up to that. But also just the stuff they do around the house and what's going on outside of the house that you can hear while they're in there and they're hiding. And then there's like these loud noises, and then the music kind of kicks along with it. It's got sort of this dark, eerie music with it. And it kind of lulls you into one thing, and then you get a scare from this other direction just from the use of the sound and the music. So I think all in all, as far as the visuals or the production of the movie, it looks really good. As I mentioned, Leigh Whannell, I think he has really developed a style that's becoming unique to him. And I enjoy that. Like I said, I enjoy a director, especially in a horror genre, that's not afraid to move the camera around and try different things visually to keep you interested. Because a lot of these stories, especially werewolf movies, we've seen countless times. So you got to bring a little something new here and there. Although he tries to do some other things that we'll get to later that don't quite land. But we'll get to that. Don't worry. To go along with the production value of the movie, it also moves along at a pretty good pace. It's less than 2 hours long, so you don't get too much dragging. It kind of has a slow start as it tries to build up into something with some messaging that we'll get to later. But once he gets scratched by this werewolf, it's not a very drawn-out process as far as, well, I mean, you see him transforming, but it's not like it drags on and on and on. You have to wait for different things to happen. He's transforming pretty quickly once he gets scratched on into the final phases of what he becomes. That leads into the next positive of the movie, which is all of the werewolf effects were practical. All the transformations were done with prosthetics and, all that fun stuff. And it leans into what this movie really is. As much as it's a werewolf movie, it's much more of a body horror movie. I read some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and Leigh Whannell really wanted this to be like The Fly, David Cronenberg's The Fly, with Jeff Goldblum, which if you haven't seen that movie, that's probably the height of body horror movies right there. But he wanted to echo that, and you could kind of see that as you're watching the movie in the things that he is going through. And it's just an added bonus to know that it was done practically and in camera. It makes it a little more fun for all of us horror movie fan geeks, because that's kind of the stuff we really like. We don't care much for the over-reliance on CGI, so it's always a fun turn to see things done that way, although I will say it doesn't quite live up to some of the other werewolf transformations that we've seen many years ago, and probably that we will never ever see duplicated again. Let's see, my last positive for this movie, as I mentioned, it's under 2 hours long. It's an hour and 43 minutes, so again, any movie nowadays that is running under 2 hours is a positive, especially a horror movie. You kind of want it right in that hour and a half, maybe a little bit over range. That way you're not getting bored with what's happening on the screen. And I will give credit to this movie. You don't really get bored once the action sort of ramps up. And moving into the bad or the negative of the film, I will say, I know this is a horror movie, but it's not especially scary. I do give it credit for the body horror elements of the movie. And yes, that does work because it's gross and, it got practical effects, which always helps. But outside of that, you don't get many moments of legitimate scares in this movie. I think what it's going for is sort of just the terror of us knowing that this guy is turning into the werewolf, where his wife and child don't know. So there's sort of I like to say the alien versus aliens effect that you can go for in a horror movie. Like with the first Alien, if you had never seen it, you wouldn't know what it was about. So you would be learning as the crew learns. Well, with Aliens, part of the horror element is that you know what the alien is, and these characters don't. So there's that tension there. Well, they're trying to pull that off here, but it doesn't really work. And I don't want to give things away because they did a really good job. I will give this, but I should have put this in the positives, but the trailers don't tell the whole story, and they did a good job. I was a little bit surprised at a certain thing in this movie, and that's there to give you more of a threat. However, it just seems sort of basic. Doesn't really seem, as much as they want to try different things, it feels kind of like a typical chase movie. I don't know. I don't want to give things away, but it's just, ultimately, I'm going a long way around to say it's not an especially scary horror movie. Also, I think, with the body horror stuff, while it is gross, you don't really have a great werewolf design here. And again, I will concede that they were trying to do something different. And while he is transforming, it's, very brutal to see what's happening to his body. But when you see the final product, you're just like, oh, that's your werewolf? Okay. Not especially the scariest thing I've ever seen, but Again, I understand what you're going for, but yeah, well, I mean, come on, we're horror fans. We would go to a werewolf movie. You want to see a kick-ass werewolf. You know what I mean? So I'm going to give it a negative. It's my podcast. If you can't come up with a good werewolf design, then you're going to get some strikes against you on this podcast. My next negative for the film, and I discussed this a little bit earlier with the setup for the movie, but there is this messaging in the film. And yes, Lee Whannell did that with Invisible Man, and that was about being in an abusive relationship. This one, I think they're trying to say something about how Blake, when he was little, his dad he wasn't really abusive. I don't know. He just would get mad at him, but they were in a situation where he should have got mad at him because they're out in the woods with guns and he's just kind of wandering around. I don't know. Anyway, they're trying to set up, I guess, this angry dad thing, and they do a very bad job of it. They hit you in the head with it. How about that? It's not very subtle. And then there's other things in this movie that are trying to get across with this message where it's like, okay, we get the point. You keep doing the same little thing here with your daughter to kind of reassure her of things. And it's like, okay, we get it. You know, I don't have to hear it 8 times in 3 minutes. I understand what the motivations here were with these characters and what you're trying to say. Ease it back, Lee. I'm not as dumb as you think I am. And like I said, it kind of, when you start thinking about it, you're like, I just don't get it. Because there's times where he's supposed to be like, everybody's like, oh my God, he's angry. But you're kind of like, well, of course he's going to be angry at that moment. There's a point where his daughter is about to get run over by a car. Of course he's going to be angry that she's not listening. I don't know. I don't want to give things away. But yeah, it was a bit weird. And that leads into my next negative. That is the whole family dynamic here. I guess they're supposed to have some kind of issues with the marriage. They have moments where they talk about something's not working in the marriage or something like that, but they don't really explain it enough. I mean, maybe if they'd have played up more that he was abusive or did have anger or something like, I guess, in The Shining where Jackie broke the kid's arm, you know, or something like that, you know, where maybe he was a recovering alcoholic like that. I don't know. That would be ripping off The Shining, but at least you would understand more. They never really explain that. And then there's sort of this turn when he gets sick, how she's like, you're my best friend and I love you and I have to help you. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not what we saw at the beginning of the movie. So that was a bit weird and kind of throws you off as you're trying to invest in these characters. It also doesn't help with, as I mentioned, the body horror, because while you can feel sympathy for this guy going through this, you're kind of just not really invested in the characters any more than just on a visual level. So really, when that happens in the body horror, even the horror elements, you just kind of don't care about these people very much. And I think part of that goes to Julia Garner as Charlotte. I just don't think she's very good in this movie. She's kind of one note. And I mean, she's not given a whole lot to work with as far as a character is concerned. And I don't know. I just didn't really buy the chemistry between the two or the family dynamic. Maybe that's what affected her performance. Because like I said, she just didn't have enough to work with to create a character. She's just sort of the wife, you know what I mean? And with the daughter, I don't really want to criticize a young actress for her performance. It's not like a terrible performance, but it's kind of weird because it seems like she's older than what the dialogue for her character is, if that makes any kind of sense. It's almost like, because she looks like she's about, I don't know, 11, 12 years old, but like the lines of dialogue she has and the way she's behaving is like a 7 or 8 year old kid. So it's kind of weird. Because you're like, well, how the hell old is this kid? Why is she acting like that? She seems very immature for how old she looks. So, again, I don't want to lay that at the feet of this child actress, but it just, again, it makes this whole family dynamic not really work, where you really need it to work so you can sympathize with these people as they're going through it. Like I said, if this was some sort of loving family, or maybe this was their moment to reconnect and you were really bought into the family dynamic, when he's going through this stuff and we know that he's going to turn into a werewolf, you're going to feel a whole lot more tension because you're worried about these characters. You care about them. You're like, I don't want them to get hurt. Now it's just more or less, you're like, well, I guess I don't want these characters to get hurt because they're the heroes of the movie. That's kind of how generic it is. And that sort of leads me into my final negative for the movie. And again, I'm trying not to spoil things. That's why it's a little vague here and there, but as good as the movie looks, and as much as they're trying to make this a new, different take on the story, it's really nothing that interesting or exciting or memorable. outside of a few things visually that they do, really this story is basic as hell. And the characters aren't interesting enough for you to care about. So by the end, you're just like, meh, whatever. This is the type of movie where in a couple months, you won't even remember that it came out. Which is a shame because I really do like Lee Whannell as a director. And I was a bit surprised. I didn't have high expectations going into this movie, but I did know his name from these other films that he worked on. So I kind of had an idea of what I thought was going to happen. And when it really didn't, I was like, oh, well, that seems like a wasted attempt here to try something new. At any rate, let's go ahead and move on into the nitpicky. And again, these are things that are neither good nor bad. Just things in the movies that always seem to make me laugh. Sometimes Hollywoodisms, sometimes, like I said, just weird things that I pick up as I'm watching the movie. I will say that this goes for a lot of horror movies now. Has there ever been a worse device ever invented to hurt a horror movie writer than a cell phone? In this movie, they have to come up, well, obviously they're out in the middle of the woods, so they come up with we don't get a signal out here. But as I was watching that, I was like, God, that must be so tough to sit there and write a script and be like, okay, I've got them here and I got this creature and this is going to happen. And then you have like a voice in your head go, well, why don't they just use their cell phone and call the cops? You know what I mean? You always try to invent ways for the cell phone to not be able to get used, right? The battery dies or you don't get any service or you can't use it right now because you'll make a noise. You know, there's all kind of ways. It's like you have to have a writing partner on a script just to write how are we going to get around the cell phone situation in this movie. Let's see, my next nitpick for this movie, I mentioned, and you've seen it in the trailer, they have the whole car crash thing where the tree's hanging there and they got to climb out and they run to the house after being chased by something. And they get to the house and the husband's like, yeah, but he's in full panic mode, boarding up, plays everything. And then he turns to his daughter, he's like, okay, you need to go to sleep now, get your rest. I'm thinking, this child, there's no way on earth. Hell, as a grown-ass man, if I had gone through that, I'm not sleeping probably for a good week. Even after I get out of that situation, if I had, like, armed officers outside of my bedroom door to make sure nobody busts in, I still would have trouble sleeping. It's like, there's no way this little girl's going to fall asleep right now. Like, come on, Dad, give her a break. You just got out of an accident and chased through the woods by God knows what, and she's a kid. She may never sleep again, or at least have to have years of therapy before she ever gets a solid 8 hours of sleep. And my final nitpick for this film, and I know they're a married couple, they took their vows for sickness and health and good and bad or whatever. I don't even remember what the vows were after all these years. I have to say there's a point in this movie where I think I would have to draw the line. And she's with her husband who she thinks has this disease that she has no idea what the disease is or how it's transferred or anything like that. And she kind of helps him with some really nasty looking bandages that have gotten soaked with blood and all kind of nasty goo. And I just couldn't help but think about sitting there, I'm like, if I ever do get married again and I'm in the weird house out in the middle of the woods after we've been attacked by something, and she's in the corner with some weird disease that I have no idea what it is. Yeah, I think maybe I'm just going to shut the door and, whatever happens, happens. I'm sorry. I have to put my self-preservation above all else. I know it's very romantic, isn't it? That's probably why I stay single. But I'm just like, man, that is a line that you better be in love. If there's even a doubt in your mind, if you ever look at that person like, I don't know, maybe I want out of this marriage, that would be the time to act. Because God knows what, well, if that was a disease, now everybody's got it in the house. But anyway, I just thought it was pretty funny. I'm like, I don't know if I would have crossed that line. Might have made an excuse like, I'm sorry, honey, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what to do. Well, let me go in the other room and see if I could get the phone to work. So for my final verdict for Wolfman, I will say Lee Whannell continues to impress me as a director. I do love what he does visually with this film, with the sound design and all the practical effects. I think that works really great. I just think this movie doesn't bring anything that interesting or have cool characters or a cool werewolf design or something that I could be like, oh, you got to go see this on the big screen. I will say if this comes out on streaming, which it will probably in 3 weeks, the way it works now, I would say, if you want to check it out, do it then. because then you only got to really be half invested in the movie. There's not a whole lot of plot going on here. It's pretty basic. And it kind of had that feeling of a very well-made Netflix original film. You know what I mean? It seems like that's where this movie should have landed. Although I will say this is January, so there ain't a hell of a lot out there to watch. So if you do just want to get out of the house and go to the movies, this isn't that bad of a movie to where you would hate yourself. You'll just be like, that was all right. And then you'll forget about it in 3 weeks. So ultimately, I would say just wait for it to come out on whatever streaming service it's going to come out on. I'm trying to think. I think Blumhouse, that's who produced the film. I think they work with Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. But at any rate, that is my verdict for Wolfman. Just wait for it to come out on streaming service. You'll enjoy it a whole lot more. So that wraps up our talk about Wolfman. Now that my throat is completely raw. What was I thinking? I've heard a joke that hardly any of you are going to get. Well, you live and learn. You can let me know if you got the joke or if you at least enjoyed it. You can get in touch with me on Instagram at Cinematic Traveler Pod or through my email, thecinematictravelerpod@gmail.com, or leave a comment on whatever service you're listening to. Follow, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Share it with your friends and family on social media. I'd appreciate that. Also, if you do want to listen to a spoiler-filled review, I am on another podcast, Just Go Watch, and we will be doing Wolfman, and we'll be going full spoiler on that. So you can find that and listen to me and my co-hosts talk about this film in depth. But before I go, I just want to thank you once again for taking the time out of your day to listen to my show. I greatly appreciate you as an audience member. I tell everyone I know I've got the smartest and sexiest audience in all the podcast universe, and you never fail to live up to those high standards. And as you are traveling around on this blue and green ball, bouncing through the cosmos, I need you to do one thing for me. Go out there and do that voodoo that you do so well. Punch it.